Hi there, I'm Zephyr Green, and today I'm going to be talking about Salt and Sanctuary. First of all, I love this game. If you haven't played it, check it out. You can often get it on sale on Steam for like $4.50. But it's totally worth the full price, in my opinion. Now, what is Salt and Sanctuary? This is a bit of an older game now. It was originally created by a small indie company called Ska Studios. And Ska Studios has been around for many years. Back in, I believe, 2007 or 2008, they created The Dishwasher. And by they, I mean James. It was a side-scrolling action game with combat inspired by Devil May Cry. It was followed shortly after with a smaller twin-stick shooter, I Made a Game with Zombies in it, in which the creator actually sings a song about how the zombies are coming in from the sides of the screen and that he made this game. It's pretty funny. He made a bunch of other games, such as Charlie Murder and a few others, and eventually Dark Souls seeped into his inspiration and broke into the design of this game, Salt and Sanctuary. Now, internally, the game was called Project Tower, and it was planned to be a roguelike tower climber game, basically a roguelike dungeon game, with a boss at the top of each tower. But during development and early playtesting, feedback quickly turned it into something else. It turned into something more similar to Dark Souls meets The Dishwasher. Now, Salt and Sanctuary is a dark world of mystery pieced together by lore bits all over, much like the Souls series. It is itself a 2D side-scroller in a Metroidvania world of doors, keys, and switches. And much like the Souls series, has lots of bosses. It was originally released back in 2016, just 1 month before Dark Souls 3. But who am I? Why am I talking about this? So in 2019, I was frustrated with the balance of this game, and I decided to break into it and mod it. So I started breaking down different effects into their individual parts and pieces, such as attack speed, or movement speed, or roll speed, or damage bonuses. And that mod is called Desalinated, and it still exists, but it's kind of defunct. You have to downgrade the game to use it now. But that mod gained a lot of traction in the community, and I became part of that niche community. And I am known entirely by my GitHub name and my programmer handle, Zephyrus Green. And due to my activity in the community, my helpful nature and conversations about bugs and designs with the original creator, James Silva, aka Jameszilla, I was trusted to playtest the sort of sequel, Salt and Sacrifice, as well as hired as a contractor to fix bugs, add quality of life features, and eventually create an alternate balance mode for this game. It was an exciting time. Now it's been a little over a year since I've released a major balance mode. The Enhanced Combat mode was released in April of 2023. And I want to cover it and everything else that's changed in the game since I started to work on it. So I'm going to just go over every major change that I think is noteworthy, and I'm going to go patch by patch as best as I can as well. So I'm just literally going to read the patch notes and explain some of what happened. So I know a lot of players in any game don't often read the patch notes, or maybe I wrote them in a way that made them too short and not too useful to read. Okay, I've switched over to a document that has all the patch notes in it. So I'm just going to go from bottom up. A lot of these are bug fixes or quality of life fixes, and I just want to talk about a little bit of everything. I want to cover a little bit of everything, and I want to make sure that we kind of have a one-stop shop for these details. So, this is a bug. Tree of Men now properly returns stolen salt. at 75% HP. Tree of Men was one of the more frustrating bosses in the game, and it was only learned after I started my contract that it was actually not returning people's salt. So, unless you beat it, you didn't get your salt back. Normally what happens in Salt and Sanctuary is when a boss gets to 75% HP, they will return any salt that you lost previously in the fight. Unlike Dark Souls, which leaves a blood stain on the ground, the Tree of Men, the boss, would actually steal this and become more powerful. So that you have to actually get them back down to 75% HP or lose that salt forever. And yes, bosses actually become stronger when they have stolen salt. So there are some little things. Ground fire can no longer damage bosses if the player's outside the arena. There were some abuses with killing things when you weren't actually in the arena with them. These were deemed bugs, so they were fixed. Various enemies, such as the Coveting, which are ghosts, and the Witch of the Lake, both of which float, were decidedly able to not float as far away from the camera anymore. I've had multiple thank yous on this bug fix, or this quality of life fix, however you want to see that one. Now, this one, Murdelia Mal, no longer drops salt on New Game Plus cycles. This boss is, lore-wise, ethereal or more projection than actually a character in the game, and thus has no salt to drop. So in the normal game, does not drop any salt, but when you got to New Game Plus 1, it was adding salt to the drop list. So that has been removed. It is a lore tidbit, but it was deemed important to maintain. Angsty Bones is an enemy that often teleported away from you, and then towards you, and then away from you, and then towards you, and could often get stuck in a loop of 8 or 9 or even 10 teleports, making them very obnoxious if you didn't just kill them in one hit, which was possible, but nonetheless. The Stenchmost Fowls have stench pods, which are little minions, actually got stuck outside the fog wall if they passed through it. Fog wall in reference to Dark Souls there, but there's actually no fog in Salt and Sanctuary. So it just looked like an invisible wall, which just kind of defines the arena bounds, and they'd get stuck outside, which meant that they weren't actually a threat. They still are a relatively weak threat, as they are ads, but they are now a threat. And then this boss sometimes didn't aggro both of the ghosts that guard the coveted axe. So when you attack the coveted axe, because the ghosts are invulnerable, they don't take damage, but they do now aggro. So some good fixes here. And then some various enemies, such as the final boss, actually could throw you inside the wall, and you would have to fight him from inside the wall. A funny situation, but has now been remedied since this major patch. Some other changes. Aiming was cleaned up, although it probably could use some more cleanup, so I'll look in that in the future. Guardian Blade and Flamestar are effects that kind of tied in with multi-hits. And due to a 0.1 second iframe that enemies get, well, any character gets, to reduce any form of abuse of damage, these attacks kind of sucked. So, they were changed to ignore iframes from recent hits so that they would work correctly or more correctly than they previously did. NPCs in your sanctuaries actually give a 10% or flat 10 bonus of some form to different things. So, for example, the guide actually gives 10% or flat 10 item find or luck effect. The leader gives salt bonus, and the alchemist gives defense bonus. But there was a bug where the alchemist NPC was actually giving not 10%, but 10% per armor upgrade, which led to a situation where he gave you nothing unless you upgraded your armor, and if you upgraded your armor to all 7 levels, it was actually giving you 14 levels of defense, but only in the zone that the alchemist NPC was in, not the intended effect. So now it gives 10% to all defense on your character as the intended effect. So it was abusable, but I don't think most players knew about it. So just little things like that, I think were interesting bugs. And I'm saying this as a developer. So magic costs in the UI were cleaned up so that they didn't show double the amount. You'd get an item, pick up like Fireball, you look at it and goes, oh, okay, it costs 20 focus. And if you're new to the game or new to magic in the game, you might look at that and go, I only have 60 focus or 40 focus or something like that. That sounds really expensive. I don't want to use it. And so there were situations where players were turned off by magic because they thought it was either bad or too expensive. So that was brought to my attention, and we fixed that. So it actually is meant to be something closer to, say, 10. And then as a side note, focus costs for magic in this game are actually scaled up or down based on your weight class, whether you're in like 25% endurance or 75% endurance and things like that. So a fireball might actually only cost you 5 or 6 focus instead of the 10 listed, but that's not dynamic in the UI. That's meant to be more of a secret that you're supposed to discover. And then reduce the amount of formulas that uses so that there's only just one formula for that carry cost. And just a nice little thing, there had been a couple players, myself included, that had tried out fist-only runs. Unarmed damage was never listed anywhere. So it was just a dash in the UI. It didn't tell you anything about what was going on. So that's now listed in the menu. I know it's small, but small things add up. Okay, so I'm going to start from the top of the list of the items here. Kismet ring. It is a luck ring. It was supposed to give probably more, but all of the... So luck or item find is considered a stat in the game. So it means that this stacks. You could wear multiple Kismet rings if you so chose in like New Game Plus. Not that it was very effective, but you could. Just as you can wear multiple strength rings. Now, the stat rings all give 3. So if you wear a ring of strength, a ring of magic, or a glove of strength, or something like that, they always give 3. But this was no different for the Kismet ring, which was actually a substat. Willpower gives item find, stamina, and focus. So there's a single ring that gives 9 or so item find, while also giving stamina and focus. So I discussed this with the developer and said, hey, can we like crazy buff this? And he's like, yeah, sure. So buff to 15 item find, it's a lot better. It's not going to change too much, but it is a lot better. And then there were a ton of rings that were actually broken. One of these was the sparkling ring. I don't think anyone ever attempted to really use this. It didn't do anything because it was actually never hooked up to do anything. So I hooked it up and made it give 25% to all healing. Now, healing in this definition means potions and the healing ring, as well as prayers. It does not include the lifesteal mechanic that is on certain charms or weapons. So just want to clarify that. That's what this video is about, is to clarify some of the mechanics here and talk about them. Ring of Meditation did not work. It was supposed to reduce prayer cost. Burning Sky Ring partially worked. It worked on spells, but didn't work on incantations. And then Pale Charm worked on almost every melee attack, except for maybe the ones you might have wanted it on. So it worked great on swords and anything that moved in an arc. Daggers technically move in a very small arc, swords move in a very large arc, and hammers also, and axes. But it didn't actually work on spears or whips. So that was added to the list of functionalities to the Pale Charm. It grants just a little bit of reach, but it was granting reach in different... It still grants reach in a little bit of different ways for different weapons, but now it works more cleanly on those effects. So it also works in future versions here. It also works on Shield Bash. Added 5 unused rings to the game. They already had localizations hooked up. They were mostly functional, but they were just never released or put anywhere in the map or the world. And developer and I discussed, let's release these. So we did. The original developer, James. So Twin Metal Ring was added. It gives 50% bonus damage to fists. So you can do that fist run. Corroded Ring was a creation of mine. Gives 50% damage to the thrown potions. So anything that's not like a dagger or the potato, which is technically just a blunt dagger in the code. The water pot, the firebomb, the granado, all of these count as thrown potions. So if they explode, they're potions. Basically, they're thrown potions. So gives 50% damage. It's the only way to scale potion damage. Band of the Humble gives 3 wisdom. It was just simply not there, so there was a stat ring for everything else except for wisdom. Stone Ring grants 10 poise. That is quite a bit, actually, but it is intended, like many other items, are commonly just like 3 or 10 or 10%. So went with a 10 poise. It was already partially hooked up. So that is actually quite good in the early game to have if you don't want to get staggered. Heart Spent Ring. I don't know if anyone has actually used this since the patch, but it grants extra focus for a cost of health, which allows you to cast more spells. If you've actually used this, make a comment. I would love to know if anyone has actually used a Heart Spent Ring. And looks like I have a repeat in the updates there. That's from like 2 years ago, so oops. Anyways, some co-op tweaks. We'll talk about those real quick. In the original game, if you co-opt, it's only couch co-op, but you can use things like Steam Remote Play. Items like keys and some of the rare items were actually restricted. And in my mod Desalinated, I removed this, and I discussed this with James and said, you know, I think it would make a much better co-op experience. It's actually a mod that exists out there outside of my own mod. There are other individual mods that have already removed this effect as well. So maybe we make this more fun, you know, to co-op and to play together. As you know, just do that. And he's like, absolutely, we should revert that. So rare item restriction for shared pickups has been removed. It's pretty good. May not be perfect. I think I missed something that's actually coming out in the upcoming patch. But you should be able to move through the game pretty much 90% perfectly while playing co-op. You get your boss checkoffs in the code to say that, you know, you beat this boss, you got this key, you went through this door. So that is super helpful. I also added gold pickups. So gold in the game drops on the ground. Salt is handed straight to the character. So only the character that touches the gold on the ground actually got the gold originally. So now it doesn't matter who touches the gold. The gold is then copied over to the second character. So you still get the same amount. It's not split or reduced. So if there was 100 gold from an enemy, you now both get 100 gold as long as you touch the gold. So again, a help for co-op. Rotten platforms. This was a change that was already implemented in Salt 2 by the time I got to it, but I wanted to just throw it backwards into Salt 1. Salt 2, I'm referring to Sacrifice as Salt 2 here. Rotten platforms are the braking platforms, but then you have a player that gets kind of stuck behind, or the first player jumps and the second player jumps a little late and they fall to their death or something like that. So I wanted to make that a little bit easier, and Sacrifice had already done that, so I just kind of mimicked that a little bit. However, players often abused high staggering weapons and abilities, so that bosses literally presented no challenge in co-op. So enemies have increased stagger in co-op. They already had increased health. They just didn't have increased poise. So they don't get staggered as easily in co-op. It's only 50% increased. So you have 2 people, but you can still do quite a bit of stagger if you so chose. And then the co-op player may turn and work at their proper creed. Now, this kind of assumes that you actually are maybe sharing a creed. You're both part of the 3 or Devara's Light, or that there is a natural sanctuary somewhere in the world that you can fast travel to. So there are some limitations on that, but you do have to be at the proper creed of the co-op player. Okay, working up the list. Menus. So we did a bunch of stuff to the menus, and just playability. Screen shake options. This was highly requested. The original screen shake in the game is maybe a tad overdone. So I made it so that we have both a 50% option as well as a 0% option. Very good, very helpful. I personally play at the 100%, but I have played at the 50% for a couple runs, and I like the difference if I want the difference there. Added a blood gore reduction option. It removes the jibs and body parts and whatnot and blood splatter on the walls and the ground and on your weapon, so that maybe you can play with a more varied audience watching you, or you just don't like the violence that comes with. So you can have that. And that includes, to go deeper into each thing if I can, that includes the blood potion. So the blood potion, you get it from the Betrayer's Creed, and it causes resistances to be like negated entirely, brought down to 0. And it is quite literally a like glass jar of blood. It is meant to be evil. And so when you throw it, it kind of has a red highlight. So when the gore is reduced, this is actually turned entirely grayscale or black. So just a little bit of a touch up. And for reference, this is actually inspired by Dota, where, as far as I understand, in a low violence mode, certain abilities are not red, but they're black. And maybe I'm wrong on that, you can correct me, but I'm pretty sure that's how Bloodseeker works for areas that require a low violence version. Frame rate options. This is the visual frame rate. The game's tick rate, logical updates are still 60 frames a second. But the actual draw can now go up to 360, and there's multiple options in between. Previously, you could only change your VSync option in the configuration file, and I don't know that most people even knew that was there. Understand that this game was basically made by one person with a lot of help from others, but still mostly one person. So that was just never in the menu system to begin with, but it is there now. I do usually play with VSync on myself. And I think that was actually the default option. So, but now you can turn it on and off. I'm going to skip the next one. There's now an inventory sorting option. It just kind of goes back and forth between kind of the order you pick stuff up, what you currently have equipped, and then different kind of like groupings. And these last two, I am 99% sure these were actually combined. So you're kind of looking at original sort, equipped, and then kind of this last one, where it's kind of sorting like all the swords together and all the guns together and all the armors together, and then showing them by their current upgrade level. So if they're 2 or 3 or 7. And then this is really nice. This was in Desalinated, and I was allowed to add it into Salt Sanctuary as well. Percentage toggle, as well as the strike / breakdown on weapons. So weapons have a hidden modifier in the game originally, where something like an axe actually does 50-50 strike and 50-50 slash. So this was not being portrayed to the player, communicated to the player, and now is actually in the menus. So you can actually see that. And the percentage toggle here was used for like carry weight and armor damage reduction. So you might have 200 strike armor, strike defense, which equates to 50% damage reduction, and you could toggle that. That same L3 toggle on controller now also is used to toggle off the scaling letters. So Salt and Sanctuary uses the same kind of letter system like the Soul series. But you can toggle that off and actually see the numbers underneath. So if you see the number, say 3 or 3.0, that actually means that the stat that it's associated with, say strength, at the soft cap, it gives plus 300% damage from the base. So that's what that means. And then it's just for the stat. It does not mean that the whole weapon is scaling at an S tier. It's not a tiering system for the whole weapon. It's just for a tiering system for the stat. And that's the same thing as Dark Souls. So anyways, moving on. And then you can also increment certain things kind of infinitely fast that previously only worked on the controller options with mouse and keyboard. A very controversial change, but nonetheless it happened, and it's going to stay that way. The double input bugs and the airborne manipulations. So long jump, what is the long jump? The long jump was caused when you did a jump and a roll at the exact same logical frame. Now, if you were just doing this on the controller, it took a little bit of effort, but with some practice, you can basically guarantee it. And what people would do is they would strip down their character to 25% or less carry weight so that they got the fastest roll, best roll, and technically the best jump. And what it would do is it would take the vectors or trajectories of the two animations and add them together. And then since the jump animation came last or second in the code, it would first apply the roll animation and then apply the jump animation every frame. So the game basically thought you were in two animations at once, which caused you to kind of jettison yourself at an angle up into the sky and to the side at the same time. In realistic sense, what this was being used for was a lot of different things. It affected combat, it affected map traversal, and at the end of the day, it was a very unintended bug. And so I was explicitly told to fix all of these. So most of these, 4 of these, were caused by that frame perfect scenario, and how a lot of speedrunners and others were using these, just to clarify, was they were simply double binding buttons. There was no skill involved, just button binding. So just putting that into perspective a little bit. But it did cause soft locks. It did not ever, it was just never intended to be there. So there's this weapon swapping incantation one. I'm not sure how well known this one was, but if you weapon swapped and cast a incantation at the exact same time, you would kind of like kneel down and use the animation for the incantation, and then it would swap your weapons, which would reset you to idle in the same frame. But the code ran as if you had finished the animation for the incantation, and would make it so that you didn't pay any focus cost for the incantation or magic that you used. So this, when I say incantation, this includes prayers. But primarily it was used for only a handful of prayers, or a handful of magics that very specifically worked with this glitch. But it made it basically a frame perfect cast, as well as a completely free cast. So naturally that was unintended. So you are intended to finish out the animation for an incantation. You are intended to pay for it. Double inputs caused a ladder movement glide effect, where if you hit jump and I think it was like roll or something like that, which was ladder slide, something like that, it would cause you to jump up and back and simultaneously regrip the ladder where there was not a ladder. It would reset the animation for grabbing the ladder. So the game thought you were on a ladder, but you had moved up and to the left. and then you spam this button and you could kind of walk or fly up and to the left or up and to the right, depending on which way the ladder faced. So you did have to find a special ladder. Again, not intended, and definitely could cause some soft locks. And it also was, many of these were actually commonly found by newbies, and it would kind of break their experience as well. But again, at the end of the day, they were just bugs. That's why they were fixed. Bell of Return no longer works while airborne. This was used for a death avoidance bug, which also allowed you to do a teleport, like to the end of the world, and skip like 80-90% of the game. So that was fixed as well. And then another input combination single frame bug that allowed aim flying was also fixed. And a couple of these were actually fixed by James, not me, but the rest were fixed by me. So just to put that in perspective, these were bugs and I'm not undoing them. I get that question a lot. Please stop asking. Seriously, stop asking. Anyways, moving on. There was a small bug with the inventory size that would actually, you could max out your inventory size if you played like New Game Plus 7 and then just repeated. There's no New Game Plus 8. You could just repeat this over and over. And that has been increased. And saves are no longer backwards compatible from patch 8 and to patch 9. So I'm not going to cover enhanced in this section. And we'll probably end up splitting it out into a separate video. We'll see. In patch 10, which released in April of 2023, just for reference, patch 9 released, I believe, in October of 2022. We'll go to the top of this one. Added a balance mode. So I was given the privilege to rebalance the game while maintaining the original game as is, minus bug fixes. I am very happy to have this split personally. It creates kind of this classic versus expanded mentality. In a way, you could compare it to something. I'm an older gamer. You compare it to something like Diablo 2, where you have classic mode and expansion mode. So just think about it that way. It is a massive overhaul to the balance and some of the mechanics of the game. Massive in the sense that Souls games usually don't do a lot of changes, and indie games usually release and just kind of stay as is. So all previous characters are locked into classic mode. It is a selection on character creation. The enhanced mode is a game mode. It is not a game version. I can't express that enough. There is a lot of confusion on that, and I don't know how to fix that confusion. It is a game mode. It is the enhanced combat or enhanced mode, and it came out with this patch. Bug fixes are not part of the enhanced mode. They are part of both modes. So just trying to be extremely explicit on that. For clarification purposes, I do get a lot of these questions a lot. So bugs fixed. When it says bugs fixed, it means both modes. Melee weapon effects do not transfer to offhand weapons or spells. Yes, there were all sorts of weird interactions there that weren't supposed to be there. This came to my knowledge after fixing a bunch of stuff in the previous patch. Some of these were known, some of them weren't. But melee weapons sometimes have secret specials, and they are meant to be secret. There's no UI for them. You're supposed to just kind of figure it out and find them out. Naturally, everyone that's played the game a lot knows where all of the specials are now. But say a weapon could have a special where it's a mace, and it has extra slash damage. So it converts half of the strike damage to slash. So it becomes a 50-50 strike/slash weapon. If you wore a weapon like this and then had an offhand weapon like a crossbow or a pistol, it would modify that weapon's strike/slash ratio the same way that was modifying the base weapon. And this was meant to give personality and uniqueness to the melee weapons. It was never intended to go to offhand weapons. I don't think a lot of these bugs were regularly reported. I think people just became used to them as secrets. And many of the original interactions were meant to be secrets. So that's totally understandable. So anyways, offhand weapons now have their own specials, but they're only used in enhanced mode. If you're modding the game with a data mod, they do work in classic. So for any modders out there, because they're only used in enhanced mode, they're not disabled in classic, unless it's something else that's like been completely changed. But the offhand weapons specifically, this one does work in classic. If you were to mess around with the data or move some of the data from enhanced to classic, that's a folder change. Not too hard to do. The stamina war horn was incorrectly set to 60 seconds. Only Creed items are supposed to be that way. So the Creed version of this is still 60 seconds. There was a bug where you could manipulate the values of anything that had two different values across buffs. So Divine Blessed Weapon and regular Blessed Weapon and the Creed Holy item and the regular Holy item. You could manipulate the Divine Blessed Weapon damage value, but get the Creed duration by manipulating that. So because what it was doing was actually just refreshing the buff, and that's not how that was supposed to work. So accidentally broke this in patch 9. I don't even remember how I broke that, but it ended up giving 0. So fix that. Mossy Charm is a charm you can attach to your melee weapon. Fast Hitter is a special that is sometimes found on melee weapons and sometimes now offhand weapons as well, or certain types of weapons. It did not work with the Scissor Weapon, which is one of the most iconic weapons in the game, as the attack itself had been accidentally excluded. So if you were, say, modding the game, you could add Fast Hitter to the Scissor attack, or excuse me, the Scissor Weapon. And Mossy Charm, any player can add that to any melee weapon. Silver Shield lightning resistance was actually negative, but the game code actually never let it go below 0%. It also doesn't let it go above 100% for obvious reasons. You can't have more than 100% damage reduction unless you're starting to heal yourself. So that was set in the data files to be 0% so that it was maybe a little less confusing. Just because that was probably just two different thought patterns going on when it was set in the data and then when it was set in the code. Here's an interesting bug. We'll discuss this at length here. These two bugs was so spells scale off your main hand weapon, and you're expected to scale your main hand weapon because your weapon is a staff. Or if you're wearing an offhand weapon, it would scale from the offhand weapon because it thought it was a wand. Yeah, seriously. So what was going on is these two actually are spawned slightly. They're brought into the world through the code slightly differently than every other incantation. And because of that, it didn't register them as incantations, it registered them as spells. So if you were wearing, say, a really big two-handed weapon and summoning Lightning Storm, instead of doing the base damage of 20 times your magic up to 40 was the soft cap would be 40 for incantations. It was instead doing something like 170 or 80. You had a max rank of magic. You had 50 magic and you had like a level 7 two-handed weapon and stuff like that. So those were heavily changed. Dark Swarm is already a very strong ability and didn't need anything extra. So it wasn't changed. But Lightning Storm was adjusted because Firestorm already did 20 damage. So it did, or maybe Firestorm even does 25. So it was adjusted to be a little bit higher than Firestorm based on its class, its magic class. Meridiella Mal. Previously, she had her salt reduced in New Game Plus modes, but we didn't want the character to be completely unrewarded. So she drops 24 base gold, 24,000 base gold, as if that was her salt value, because normally the salt value is dropped as gold plus 10 on bosses. And then when you use a crystal sphere, it wasn't actually upgrading your NPC sanctuary bonuses. So you had to actually leave the game and come back So this now actually goes through and makes sure that those update immediately so that when you take somebody else's sanctuary by converting them forcefully, religiously, whatever that crystal sphere is doing, it now updates that immediately. There were some issues with hats that were fixed. There was an issue with an enemy that never dropped their specialty drop. And there was a little crash where if people were modding the game, guilty. If people were modding the game, you could actually end up with invalid inventory that didn't exist in the base game, but existed in the modded version, which would then crash if you saw that in your game, or if it tried to load, say, a hat. Maybe there's 50 hats in the game or something. I don't know how many hats there are. But if it was trying to load hat number 51, there was no hat 51. So a very unique crash that was discovered later on from people modding. So I'm not going to cover the enhanced mode stuff down here. I will cover the rest of this here, though. So a lot of hitboxes changed, some vertical flight changes, some issues with the dragon trying to escape the arena and falling to his death. Thinking that he was launching himself at you, he would launch himself out of the arena. It's just a special animation that plays under 50% health that he gets extra aggressive. So is less likely, but I'm not sure that it's guaranteed that he will never do it. Because the jump still happens. It just has to happen near the edge. Some hitboxes shrunk so that you're not being hit preemptively, like a frame early. The final boss actually has a couple swings, overhead swings that were about 10% bigger than the visual. Just ever so slightly, like maybe not 10%, but more like 8 pixels larger in every direction. So that got adjusted. There were some adjustments to the Cyclops. There's a couple moves that look like you can dodge them because there's a move that you can dodge elsewise. So these were made a little bit more consistent. So there is this boss is technically a slight bit easier because there is now some holes in his hitbox that you're intended to kind of jump into. But it makes it standardized between 2 different attacks, one that you could and one that you couldn't. This also actually makes it so you cannot stand underneath him when he body slams. There was a mild hole there, but it was kind of unintended. You're not supposed to be able to stand directly in his belly and still not take damage. A follow-up fix for Guardian Blade from the previous patch. Guardian Blade now has its own hit timer, separate from all other hits. So this makes it so that if for any reason Guardian Blade hits an enemy, especially a boss, it's not hitting the boss 3 or 4 times as it passes through the boss, which was the actual issue there. So now it has its own hit timer or iframe timer separate from other hits. The original bug is that you would swing your sword. Guardian Blade is a blade that you summon into the air. It's a holy blade, class 5, priest, cleric. But you'd swing with your weapon, and your weapon would hit, and then the Guardian Blade would miss originally because the iframe. It's just 0.1 seconds. And then you'd swing again, and maybe the Guardian Blade would hit first because you were winding up a heavier attack or different angle of boss or enemy, and the Guardian Blade would hit, and then your melee weapon would miss due to the iframe. So this separates those out, makes it so that Guardian Blade follows the same rules as melee attacks, but only for itself. It is completely separate. And then just added some fixes so that you couldn't soft lock yourself in the map. And if there are any remaining Vertigo issues, Vertigo brand issues, where you turn upside down and soft lock yourself in the map, where you have to die or reload in some fashion, make a comment below if you know of any that have not been fixed. This is on PC. All these patches are PC only currently. Quality of life, UI, and other. Previous patch buffed Kismet Ring, but it accidentally also buffed Jesters and Guides hats. These do not stack with themselves because they are both hat slots, but they do stack with the Kismet ring and everything else. So between the willpower ring, which gives 9 luck or item find, the Jester's hat, which now gives 5, and the Kismet ring, which gives 15, you can have quite a bit of early game item find or luck, which is it adjusts your drop rate based on your number internally there. And just to cover that mechanic real quick, +5 item find is not +5%. It is just +5. There's some math behind the scenes, but every item has a base value, say 40%. And then based on your item find, it multiplies by the 40%. So anything that's listed as 40% is at the early game, it's closer to 20% drop rate. So you take whatever you're seeing and have it for that early game. And if you want the real formula, go to the wiki or something, or come to the Discord and I can look it up for you. Anyways, so item find is a little bit more controlled on these items. So you're not getting +9, +15, and +15 again. So there you go. And item find stacks because it is considered a stat. That's why I call it luck, because the second game calls it luck. It is a stat like strength behind the scenes. So it is allowed to stack where most other things do not stack. High quality of life change personally, and I hope for you as well. Intro screens are now skippable. First 3 screens, every time you boot up the game, they can be skipped as long as the game has fully loaded. So the third screen is going to check to see that all the data has loaded before it goes into the next screen, because it needs to do that. That is a limitation of how the engine was designed underneath the hood. So we don't want crashes. We want to protect you from that. There is now a main menu and an exit game option. So this is the original exit, which takes you to the main menu. And this is the new exit, which takes you back to your desktop or whatever. It closes the game after saving. So this is really handy for, say, maybe you're playing on a Steam Deck, which I do test a lot of my changes on the Steam Deck in addition to testing them on the PC. And just play testing and stuff. So very handy so that you don't have to do some extra menu options within, let's say, the Steam Deck or within your PC, Alt F4. It was also a requested feature, so was able to get that approved and put in there. Poise now shows proper values in the UI. There were some issues there where it was showing, what was it? I think it was showing double what your actual value was. So UI fist damage was fixed, some more accuracy with rings and comparisons and stuff. This may not be perfect, but if you have everything equipped and you're not comparing 2 pieces of gear, it should be accurate, like 99% accurate for all of these things. But you now show charm damage, golden wine damage, protection armor buffs, so you can look at your character, put on a weapon, look at your damage or your armor and your defense, then use a buff and see the difference. So that's the goal there. Kind of similar again to inspirations of like more ARPG, Diablo kind of stuff, so you can see the totals. And then Great Scissors can transmute into Great Swords. So this was a problem where people they'd transmute their only Great Sword, the Claymore, the Kiramura, into the Great Scissors, and then they wouldn't have a Great Sword again. So this can go back and forth. You still lose whatever you've crafted and your crafting materials, but this goes back and forth. They are the same category now. Well, they're treated as the same category for crafting. There's now a hide helmet. You want to see your gorgeously pink or purple or blue or Charlie Murder green hair? You can. And that option also exists in Salt and Sacrifice, so it was a no-brainer to add that here. We added some log files, or that, again, similar to Salt and Sacrifice, we had log files there. So added that to this game. They're still pretty limited, but it allows us to help debug if you come to us with a problem. Maybe you have a resolution crash or a boot crash. This will help us determine some future proofing issues. The game is now 8 years old, so very nice feature to do that for maintenance. You know, that's what I'm hired for, is maintenance. Language selection no longer requires a reboot, and language selection now follows a kind of web standard of showing the language in its own language instead of showing the language in your current language. So you're going to see that structure now, which should also help maybe allow you to revert any language changes if you get stuck in the wrong language. Maybe. Anyway, I'm not going to go in enhanced mode right now. I'm going to go up here to some other stuff here. There were some fixes with some wand skills were ignoring leveling rules. Transmutation had an issue with sorting. And fast travel in hard mode was discovered. So this patch should release or will be released depending on when this video releases. We're almost to the end here. So just bear with me for a couple more minutes. The Kraken worm sometimes would not find a valid landing location, which would cause it to repeat its flying animation, which would cause it to sometimes fly higher than it should, which would then cause this bug to repeat itself. Or it would just simply attack over and over. Fixed further some fast travel issues in hardcore mode. Fixed some issues with hide helmet. Objects have stolen salt. There's everything in the game that you can interact with is an entity. It is basically an enemy that you're talking to, even if it's a bag or a treasure chest. And so it's been a little bit of a task to find everything that you can interact with that sometimes can steal your salt if you die. There's a bunch of different interactions there that can cause that, as weird as that is. Fixed an issue where slimes, when you break out of them, they grab you. When you break out of them, they wouldn't drop anything. So they could steal your salt. You'd go kill them from a breakout, but they wouldn't drop your salt and they wouldn't drop items. So now that is considered an actual full-on kill. And they fully grab and break. You fully break out of that. They also die slightly faster so that the items actually show up within a reasonable time. There was a really unknown bug where offhand weapons were actually doing less damage. This has apparently existed for a long time. It didn't get reported until very recently. Offhand weapons, if you didn't have the main hand weapon class learned, say like a class 3 sword, and you were wearing a class 4 sword, the offhand weapon would actually do 10% damage as if the offhand weapon was not learned. Very bizarre, very unique and corner case bug there. Fixed some skill nodes not being upgradable when nearby nodes were unlearned. I believe this might have been an enhanced only bug, but it should be fixed for both either way. So you can unlearn skills. You don't have to have the skills to actually be attached to anything. Unlike maybe a game like Path of Exile, you don't have to have the chain persistent. You can just remove whatever you don't want. Fix some issues with some co-op. This was kind of small. I don't remember exactly all that it went into that. Talking to any NPC will now de-aggro enemies. So if you're trying to talk to someone and there's an enemy just nearby, you could actually get stuck in a menu after death. And so like this kind of helps kind of alleviate that. It kind of resets the menus. It resets the aggro. If there's any further issues with that, again, let me know in the comments. And then I've been doing some fixes to Borderless. This may have to be reverted for the actual release though. So that may come in a future patch. Furthermore, Windows build now uses monogame. So we were on XNA. XNA is very old. It was abandoned in 2014 by Microsoft. So the monogame group is kind of carrying the torch forward with that. It's kind of an upgrade with maintenance patches and stuff. It's the same API, slightly different code, but for the most part, it's like 98% the same stuff. So with that, we are moving to DirectX 11. So yeah, you're going to have to use DirectX 11 for the Windows build now. There is an FNA build for Linux and Macintosh as well, so you can use those natively on Steam still. Those have always existed, and they're going to continue to exist, at least at this time. There is now Turkish localization, and there is now an official randomizer in the game. To cover some bases on this, again, I don't know if this video will be released before or after the actual patch. There's an item randomizer, a monster randomizer, and an alternate version of the monster randomizer. The item randomizer randomizes only non-essential items in the world. So you can find a chest. Instead of picking up 3 red shards, you might find a claymore, or the scissors, or a shroud charm, or a crate of 2,000 or 20,000 salt. So some interesting, fun stuff that happens with that. The monster randomizer does the same thing with monsters. Regular enemies are replaced with regular enemies. Bosses are replaced with bosses. The intro boat scene is untouched. A lot of that is scripted event. And I also didn't want you to lose a boss to that intro scene. Fighting the pirate at level 1 and not be able to get his drops or whatever else. And the deep, the unspeakable deep, is not a very deep boss to fight in the actual game. I've done it. It's not that interesting. I'll be very blunt. And so the boat is unchanged. The boat is untouched due to some scripting things there, and that boss not just being whatever. So you can still beat the unspeakable deep to start off the event. That is kind of the trigger that causes you to wash ashore to begin with. So story-wise, it kind of still makes sense. And then the alternative monster randomizer scales everything up and down. So it is still meant to be a challenge. Things are not going to be pushover. But instead of dealing with, say, a 3,000 health Scourge in the first area where Sodden Knight normally is, instead of dealing with like a 3,000 health version, you might deal with a 700 or 800 health version. And he won't one-shot you, but he'll probably still two-shot you. So things like that, just scaled down a little bit. And he's going to give you less salt. He's going to give you less gold. So it's not going to be nothing, but it's going to be more like you beat like an amped up version of the Sodden Knight for the gold and the salt there. And he'll do damage relatively similar to the Sodden Knight and health relatively similar to the Sodden Knight as well. It scales up very quickly though, and then by the final arena for the scaling randomizer, the final arena is upscaled to be just sub New Game +1. So it is possible to get triple bosses in many of the arenas, including the final arena. So you could get Nameless God, Witch of the Lake, and I don't know, someone else, the Jester. You could get all 3 of those in the Nameless God arena, and they would all be scaled up to be kind of New Game plus 0.9. But you'll also get the salt value as if they were all the Nameless God. So about 50,000 plus a little percentage of the actual boss. So you could get a triple boss anywhere that allows that's arena size based, and you'll get the triple salt bonus of whatever that arena normally rewards, or an approximation of it. So while it is scaled down, it's not necessarily meant to be pushover. It's still meant to be a challenge. And I personally really enjoy the scaling randomizer. I know other people really enjoy the monster randomizer. I've met people that have enjoyed both. This has been in beta testing on Steam. So try them both if you like them, whatever. Make a comment below that you like them. There you go. Or make a comment below that you hate them. Whatever. We're not going to touch that. So we are done with this video. I will cover in depth a lot of the enhanced mode changes up to this point. So I'll include patch 9, patch 10, patch 11, and patch 12.2 here in a future video instead. I'll separate them into videos. And I will go through major changes, decisions of why those changes happened and how those changes happened, and justifications and stuff like that. So kind of a developer talks, a little bit more so than this video, because I designed, and I'll talk about a little bit maybe more of the randomizer or something too in the future, but I'll be really focused on the enhanced mode. Thank you for watching again. So I am just a contractor for Ska Studios. I am not a part of Ska Studios officially. I have done all these changes under the direction of Ska Studios. So I hope you've enjoyed them. I know probably 9 out of 10 people love them. And going forward, I hope to be able to continue my relationship with Ska Studios, maybe work on a future game. We'll see. They're a very small studio, and they currently don't need a whole lot of help. So I am currently only on Salt and Sanctuary, but that probably will come to a close depending on some different things, especially as I fix all the bugs. There's no bugs to fix. I don't have any purpose to maintain much. So again, thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you like these kind of breakdowns, whether it be Salt and Sanctuary or my future dev or modding projects. I also do various other things on the channel. Check my About page.